I remember standing there, holding the letter and reading the words over and over again as if, maybe on the fifth read, they would start to make sense. My dog, Charlie, was guilty of excessive barking, according to her. The letter was printed, on official-looking paper, filled with legal jargon, and signed in a way that screamed seriousness. She gave me exactly 7 days to remedy the situation before she would seek further legal action. Now, Karen's house was 2 doors down, not even directly next to mine. And the funny thing was, Charlie wasn't one of those dogs who barked at every passing car or squirrel. He had his moments, yes, but most of the time he was just a chill, lazy golden retriever who preferred naps over noise. The thought that his occasional bark had pushed her to this dramatic step made me suspect there was more to the story. I sat down on the couch, Charlie resting his head on my knee, looking up at me with those big, trusting eyes. He had no idea about the storm brewing. I could almost imagine him thinking, "What's the big deal?" But I knew I had a decision to make. Do I confront Karen, try to talk things out, maybe apologize just to keep the peace? Or do I take a different path, one that lets her know she picked the wrong neighbor to mess with? That's when an idea began to form. It started small, almost as a joke in my head, but the more I thought about it, the more it made me smile. What if, instead of silencing Charlie, I gave him a bigger platform? That night, I called a friend of mine, Jake, who works in audio production. I told him the whole story, and by the time I was done, he was laughing so hard he could barely breathe. "You have to do it," he said between chuckles. "You'll have to make a podcast for the dog." The idea was so ridiculous, so over the top, that it was perfect. Karen wanted silence? She'd get the opposite. She wouldn't just hear Charlie, the world would. Jake offered to help me set up the equipment. I didn't know much about recording, but with Jake's guidance and a little research, I realized it wasn't that hard. A good microphone, some editing software, and a quiet room. Well, as quiet as possible with Charlie around. And we were in business. The next day, I took Charlie into the spare room and set up our little makeshift studio. I put a blanket over the desk to muffle echoes, adjusted the microphone, and even set a little bowl of treats in front of him. Charlie tilted his head, clearly confused about why we were in this room surrounded by wires and gadgets. I hit record, and with a grin, I introduced him. "Welcome to Barkcast, the only podcast hosted by a golden retriever with things to say and no filter to stop him." Charlie barked once, right on cue, and I knew we had gold. The first episode was mostly me talking, telling the story of the infamous letter and letting Charlie add his thoughts in the form of barks, yawns, and occasional sighs. I edited it down to 20 minutes, added some playful background music, and uploaded it to a podcast platform. I didn't expect much. Maybe a few friends would listen, maybe some strangers who stumbled upon it. But the universe had other plans. Within a few days, the podcast started gaining traction. People loved the concept. They sent messages saying Charlie's opinions were the highlight of their day. They joked that his barks were more insightful than most talk shows. The hashtag Barkcast started circulating on social media, and before I knew it, we had hundreds of followers. And then came the moment I'd been waiting for. I was outside watering the plants when Karen passed by on her way to the mailbox. She avoided eye contact, but I noticed she was holding her phone with the unmistakable look of someone listening to something. Later that day, one of my other neighbors told me they'd overheard Karen muttering about that ridiculous dog podcast. I couldn't help but smile, but the real twist came a week later. I got an email from a small local news outlet. They wanted to interview me and Charlie about the podcast. They said it was a refreshing, lighthearted story in a world full of heavy news. I agreed instantly. The article went online, and suddenly Barkcast wasn't just a neighborhood joke. It was a local sensation. People from other towns started tuning in. Fans sent in questions for Charlie, asking about his favorite snacks, his opinion on mailmen, and even his take on politics. I answered in a playful, Charlie voice, and the listeners ate it up. By now, I was sure Karen knew exactly what was happening. She had wanted silence, but instead, she had unintentionally launched a movement. Every time I saw her, I'd give a polite wave and an extra cheery, "Good morning," just to let her know I was thriving. The cease and desist letter had gone from a threat to the spark of something far bigger. And the best part? Charlie seemed to enjoy the attention. Whenever I brought out the microphone, his tail would start wagging, and he'd let out a few happy barks as if saying, "Let's do this." Still, I couldn't help but wonder how far this could go. Could Barkcast get even bigger? Could Charlie become the first dog to sign a podcast sponsorship deal? Could we get on national TV? I didn't know the answers yet, but I knew one thing. Karen had picked the wrong neighbor and the wrong dog, and the game was just getting started. It started with an envelope on my doorstep. A plain, cream-colored envelope, no logo, no return address, just my name, typed in bold black letters. I didn't think much of it until I opened it and read the words, "Cease and Desist." At first, I thought it was a scam, but as my eyes scanned the first paragraph, I realized it was very real. The letter demanded that I immediately stop my dog, Benny, from barking or face legal action. My neighbor, Karen, yes, her actual name was Karen, had apparently had enough of Benny's daily noise pollution and decided to bring in lawyers. Now, let me tell you, Benny isn't some wild, howling beast. He's a golden retriever with the temperament of a lazy Sunday afternoon. He barks, sure, when the mail arrives, when a squirrel dares step foot on our lawn, or when I come home from work. That's it. But Karen, oh Karen, claimed his bark was destroying her peace of mind. I remember sitting there, reading the letter and laughing. I mean, who actually does this? A cease and desist? For a dog? But beneath that laughter was a little sting of irritation. Because this wasn't just about a noise complaint. It was about her trying to control my life. And that was something I couldn't let slide. When I first moved into this neighborhood, I thought I had it all. Quiet streets, friendly people, and plenty of space for Benny to run around. But Karen made herself known on day one. She was the kind of neighbor who peeked over the fence to welcome you, but spent the next 10 minutes telling you all the neighborhood rules that weren't actually rules. She had an opinion on everything. Where I parked, how I mowed my lawn, even what flowers I planted. And now, here she was, trying to shut down my dog. I put the letter on the kitchen counter and looked at Benny, who was lying on his back with his paws in the air, completely unaware of the legal trouble he was apparently in. And that's when an idea started forming in my head, not just to fight back, but to fight back in a way Karen would never see coming. Before I get to that, you have to understand something about Benny. He's not just a dog, he's a character. The kind of dog who tilts his head when you talk to him, as if he's deeply pondering your words. He sings along to certain songs, especially old jazz. And he loves attention. If there's a camera or a microphone around, Benny is ready. That's when it hit me. If Karen thought his bark was annoying now, what if I made sure everyone could hear it? Not just in the neighborhood, but everywhere. I grabbed my laptop and started researching. Could you really make a podcast for a dog? Turns out you could. And people did. There were shows with dogs talking, or owners translating their pets' thoughts, or just playing ambient dog sounds. But I wanted to go further. I wanted Benny to have his own voice, his own platform, his own fan base, because if Karen was going to try to silence him, I was going to do the opposite. The first step was figuring out the format. I decided Benny would be the host, and I'd be his co-host and translator. Every episode would be a mix of dog, barks, funny commentary, and stories from his dog's perspective. I even thought of the perfect name, Bark Side of the Story. I spent the next 2 days setting up a small recording area in the living room. Microphone, pop filter, soundproofing panels. It looked professional. But the real star, Benny, just had to be himself. I pressed record, and Benny, as if he understood what was happening, let out a deep, dramatic bark. "Welcome, everyone," I said into the mic, "to the very first episode of Bark's Side of the Story, hosted by Benny the Golden Retriever, who, according to some people, barks too much. So we thought, let's give them something to really talk about." The first episode was chaos. Benny barked when the UPS truck went by, when the phone rang, when I accidentally dropped my pen. I turned it into comedy. Every bark had a translation. When he barked at the UPS truck, I told listeners he was warning the neighborhood about the package bandits. When he barked at the phone, I said he was trying to tell me my car's warranty was about to expire. By the end of the 20-minute recording, I had tears in my eyes from laughing. I uploaded it that night, half expecting no one to listen, but the next morning the episode had a few hundred plays. By the end of the week it had thousands. People loved it. The comments were full of dog owners saying they played it for their own pets, or that they wished their dog had Benny's stage presence. Karen, however, was not amused. On the third day, I saw her standing in her yard, arms crossed, glaring at my house. She didn't say anything, but I knew she'd heard. Benny's studio was right by the open window, and the whole block could probably hear us recording. That's when I realized this wasn't just about making a funny podcast anymore. This was about proving a point. Karen wanted silence, and instead Benny was going to become a celebrity. And not just in our neighborhood, but everywhere. The next episodes got more creative. I brought in guests, other dogs from friends and family. I interviewed them as if they were real personalities, asking about their favorite snacks, their thoughts on mailmen, and their stance on vacuum cleaners. I added little jingles, sound effects, even mock sponsors like Squirrel Watch, keeping your yard safe since forever. The more ridiculous it got, the more people tuned in, and the more people tuned in, the more Karen seethed. I'd catch her peeking through her blinds when I was walking Benny. She'd mutter under her breath when she saw us in the street, and I knew she was plotting something. I just didn't know what. When I finally got to the park, Baxter looked at me like nothing in the world was wrong. He was sniffing the grass, chasing a butterfly, and ignoring the fact that our lives had somehow turned into a courtroom drama and a tech startup all in one. I clipped on his leash and started the walk back home, trying to process everything. It had only been 2 weeks since Karen's letter, but somehow it felt like months. My phone buzzed again. It was a message from the city council's community group page. Someone had posted a link to Barkside chats, and people were tagging each other. The comment section was exploding. Apparently, people found it hilarious that a dog could host a podcast. Someone wrote, "Finally a voice for the underdog." Another person commented, "This dog makes more sense than most politicians." By the time we reached the corner, I realized we weren't just dealing with Karen anymore. This had become a movement. Later that night, I sat at my desk with a cup of tea, scrolling through our email inbox. We had dozens of messages. A man from Texas wanted Baxter to interview his parrot. A woman from New York sent a recording of her cat snoring, hoping it could be featured. Even a small-town mayor wrote in, jokingly offering to make Baxter the honorary director of canine affairs. I couldn't believe how fast this had escalated. What started as a passive-aggressive complaint had turned into something that might actually change things for the better. But not everyone was thrilled. I got another letter from Karen the next day. This one was even angrier. She claimed Baxter's podcast was an invasion of her privacy and accused me of weaponizing dog noises. I laughed out loud. Weaponizing dog noises? What was this? Some kind of James Bond plot? Still, I knew she wasn't joking. Her words had that familiar sharpness. She gave me 48 hours to shut down the podcast, or she'd take further action. I could have stopped right there. I could have deleted everything, pretended it never happened, and gone back to quiet walks in the park. but something in me refused. Baxter wasn't just barking anymore. He was telling a story, and whether Karen liked it or not, people were listening. The next episode we recorded was different. I sat down in front of the mic with Baxter on my lap, and instead of just playful barks and sound effects, I told the whole story from the beginning, how we got the letter, how we decided to fight back, and how a neighborhood squabble turned into this. Baxter added his signature barks at the perfect moments, almost like he knew exactly what I was saying. It felt raw, real, and surprisingly emotional. By the time I uploaded it, I had no idea it would blow up the way it did. Within hours, it hit trending on a major podcast platform. News outlets started calling. They wanted interviews. Well, technically, they wanted interviews with the dog, but I was fine being his spokesperson. One local TV channel even did a segment where Baxter answered questions by barking into the mic. People couldn't get enough of it. Then came the big surprise. A lawyer reached out, not to threaten us, but to help. He specialized in cases involving free speech and said we had every right to keep doing what we were doing. He even offered to represent Baxter pro bono because every dog deserves his day in court. That line stuck with me. Every dog deserves his day in court. Karen must have seen the coverage because she suddenly went quiet. No more letters. No more threats. The only sign of her disapproval was the way she would glare at us from her porch whenever we passed by. But honestly, it didn't bother me anymore. We had built something bigger than a feud. Months later, Baxter's podcast had sponsors, regular guests, and a surprisingly loyal fan base. We had dog owners from all over sending in voice clips of their pets, and we'd feature them in themed episodes. International Bark Day became our most downloaded show ever. People weren't just laughing, they were connecting. It was like we'd tapped into this universal truth. Everyone, no matter where they're from, has a story to tell, even if it comes out as a bark. One day, as I was editing an episode, I looked down at Baxter curled up by my feet. I thought about how it all started, with one loud bark and one very angry neighbor. If Karen had never sent that letter, none of this would have happened. She tried to silence us, but instead she gave Baxter the biggest microphone of his life. We never became friends with Karen, but something funny happened. She stopped complaining about Baxter's barking. Maybe she realized it was pointless. Maybe she just got tired. Or maybe, in some strange way, she started listening to the podcast. 2. I like to imagine her in her living room, shaking her head at Baxter's antics but secretly smiling. As for us, we kept recording. Every week, without fail, Baxter would sit in front of the mic, ears perked, ready to speak to his audience. And every week I'd hit record, knowing that somewhere out there people were waiting to hear from him. It wasn't just about fighting back anymore, it was about sharing joy. And in the end, that's what made it all worth it. Because sometimes, the loudest bark isn't the one that annoys your neighbor. It's the one that brings a community together. And Baxter's bark? Well, that one's still echoing in headphones all around the world.